Cassius Vane had drilled through approximately 47 dead worlds in his career, and not one of them had ever made the hair on the back of his neck stand up quite like this. Aethyrian 7 wasn't just lifeless. It was aggressively dead, the kind of dead that suggested something had gone out of its way to ensure nothing would ever grow here again. The moon hung in the shadow of a bloated gas giant, its surface cracked and gray like old bone, and when the shuttle descended through the thin atmosphere, the only sound was the recycled hum of the engines and Piper's nervous breathing in the seat behind him. "Coordinates confirmed," Rourke said from the co-pilot's seat, his voice flat as always. The man could have been announcing the heat death of the universe, and it would have carried the same emotional weight. "Landing zone is clear. Descent in 3 minutes." Cassius glanced at the view screen. The surface was coming up fast, and now he could see them, the patterns. From orbit they looked like natural fault lines, the usual tectonic scarring you'd expect on a tectonically dead rock. But up close, they were too regular, too deliberate. Geometric shapes stretched across kilometers of barren stone, interlocking in configurations that made his eyes hurt if he stared too long. Someone had carved an entire moon into a message, and humanity had only just learned how to read the header. "Anyone else getting a 'we shouldn't be here' vibe?" Piper asked, trying for humor and landing somewhere closer to genuine anxiety. "Because I'm getting a strong ancient curse feeling, very strong, like I'm one creepy sound effect away from filing a transfer request." "Noted," Cassius said, running through the landing checklist with practiced ease. "For the record, Helix Dynamics doesn't recognize ancient curses as a valid reason for mission abort. Also, you signed a waiver." "I signed a waiver that said I might die in a cave-in, not a waiver that said I might get cursed by moon geometry." "It's implied." The shuttle touched down with a pneumatic hiss, stabilizers extending into the dust. Cassius unsealed his harness and stood, checking his suit's integrity one more time. The atmosphere outside was technically breathable, barely, but nobody with functioning survival instincts went outside on an unknown world without a helmet. He grabbed his pack, loaded with scanning equipment, climbing gear, and enough ration bars to survive a week if things went catastrophically wrong. Which they wouldn't, probably. Rourke was already at the airlock, helmet on, rifle mag-locked to his back. The man didn't talk much, but he'd kept Cassius alive through 3 separate encounters with territorial fauna on mining colonies, so he got a pass on personality. Piper joined them a moment later, her helmet slightly crooked, her scanner clutched like a security blanket. "Geology first, existential dread second," Cassius said, cycling the airlock. "That's the Helix way." The surface of Aethyrian 7 was worse up close. The dust wasn't quite dust. It had a crystalline quality that crunched underfoot like broken glass. The patterns they'd seen from orbit converged here, at the edge of a chasm that split the moon's surface like a surgical incision. Cassius approached carefully, peering over the edge. His helmet light barely penetrated 20 meters before the darkness swallowed it whole. "Depth scan," he said, and Rourke tossed him a probe. Cassius activated it and dropped it into the chasm. They waited. The probe fell for 7 seconds before it hit something and stopped transmitting. 7 seconds, Piper said, doing the math in her head. "That's about 240 meters, give or take." "Give or take what?" "Give or take whether that was the bottom, or whether something ate the probe." Cassius decided not to think about that too hard. He unspooled a repelling line from his pack, anchored it to a boulder that looked older than human civilization, and clipped in. Rourke went first, descending into the dark with the same lack of concern he showed for everything. Cassius followed, then Piper, who muttered a constant stream of nervous commentary the entire way down. The walls of the chasm weren't rock. Or rather, they were rock, but they'd been shaped, carved, polished smooth by something that understood angles humans hadn't invented yet. Veins of faintly luminescent material ran through the stone in branching patterns, like fossilized lightning. The deeper they went, the brighter it became, until Cassius could see without his helmet light. "This isn't natural," Piper said, which was possibly the most unnecessary observation in the history of xenoarchaeology. "Thanks, Piper, really cracking the case. I'm just saying someone built this. Someone with really good tools and a lot of time." They reached the bottom, or what Cassius assumed was the bottom, because the chasm opened into a horizontal passage large enough to drive a cargo hauler through. The walls here weren't just carved, they were decorated. Symbols covered every surface, flowing script that seemed to move when he looked directly at it, geometric mandalas that hurt to perceive. The bioluminescent veins grew thicker, pulsing in a rhythm that might have been his imagination or might have been something worse. Rourke's scanner beeped. He studied the readout, frowned, and beeped it again. "Problem?" Cassius asked. "Can't date the material. Scanner's giving me an error." "What kind of error?" "The kind that says out of range." Cassius took the scanner, checked it himself. The dating function was maxed out, unable to calculate an age beyond its upper limit. Which meant whatever this place was, it was older than 50,000 years. Older than human civilization. Older than most of the ruins they'd ever found. "Well," he said, handing the scanner back, "at least we know Helix is going to pay us a lot of money." They followed the passage deeper. It spiraled downward in a gentle curve, as if whoever built it wanted visitors to descend slowly, to feel the weight of the stone above them, to understand they were entering something sacred. Or something terrible. Possibly both. The air grew warmer, which made no sense on a moon with no core activity, and Cassius's suit registered a faint vibration in the stone, a frequency just below hearing. The passage ended at a door. It wasn't a door in any conventional sense. There were no hinges, no seams, no visible mechanism. It was simply a section of wall that was blacker than the surrounding stone, a perfect rectangle 3 meters tall and 2 meters wide, covered in the same flowing script they'd seen throughout the passage. Cassius approached slowly, aware that every xenoarchaeological horror story started with someone opening something they shouldn't. "Thoughts?" he asked. "My thought is we call this in and let someone with a PhD touch it," Piper said. "Rourke." The surveyor studied the door, then the walls, then the door again. "It's waiting." Waiting for what? Us. Which was not comforting. But Cassius had come too far to turn back now. He stepped forward, close enough that his helmet light reflected off the black surface. The symbols seemed to sharpen in his vision, almost legible, as if his brain was trying to decode them without his permission. He raised his hand, hesitated, then pressed his palm against the door. It opened. Not slowly, not with grinding stone or ancient mechanisms, but instantly, silently, as if it had been waiting 11,000 years for exactly this moment. Beyond was a chamber vast enough to swallow cathedrals, lit by the same bioluminescent veins that now covered the walls in intricate patterns. And at the center, raised on a platform of that strange not-quite stone, was a sarcophagus made of crystal so clear it might as well have been frozen light. Inside was a woman. Human-shaped, human-featured, but wrong in small ways. Her skin was blue, a deep azure that seemed to glow from within, and her hair spread beneath her like spilled gold. Her ears were long, tapering to elegant points that curved slightly back. She wore something that might have been armor or might have been ceremonial dress, form-fitting and covered in the same flowing script that decorated the walls. Her eyes were closed. Her hands were folded across her chest. She looked like she was sleeping. Cassius couldn't breathe. Not because his suit had malfunctioned, but because the sight of her had driven every thought from his mind except one. She was waiting for him. He stepped forward. Piper called his name. Rourke said something about caution. Cassius wasn't listening. He removed his glove, a stupid, dangerous, inexplicable thing to do, and reached out to touch the crystal. Her eyes opened. They were silver, bright as starlight, and they looked directly at him. The woman spoke, and Cassius understood every word despite the fact that her language sounded like wind through broken glass filtered through a harp. His brain shouldn't have been able to process it. There was no linguistic framework, no cultural context, nothing in his neural architecture that should have allowed comprehension. But the meaning arrived in his mind fully formed, bypassing the usual channels of translation entirely. "You are late," she said, and sat up. The crystal sarcophagus didn't open so much as dissolve, its structure unweaving into fine particles that drifted upward like reverse snow before vanishing completely. The woman swung her legs over the edge of the platform, with the fluid grace of someone who had been asleep for 11 minutes, rather than what Cassius suspected was considerably longer. She touched the floor with bare feet, flexed her fingers, and looked at him with those unsettling silver eyes. "I'm Cassius Vane," he said, because his brain had apparently decided that normal introductions were the appropriate response to waking up an alien woman from a crystal coffin. "Excavation engineer, Helix Dynamics. We're human from Earth. That's a planet about." "I know what humans are," she said, cutting him off with a gesture that was somehow both dismissive and regal. "Your species was documented 12,000 years ago. You had just discovered agriculture. My people found you unimpressive." "Yeah, well, we've really grown since then," Cassius said. "We have faster-than-light travel now. And instant noodles, those are pretty impressive." The woman tilted her head, studying him with an intensity that made him feel like a specimen under magnification. "You understand my words." "I do, and I have no idea why." "The temple is translating. It recognizes you." She stepped down from the platform, moving through the chamber as if she owned it, which, to be fair, she probably did. Her fingers trailed along the bioluminescent veins in the walls, and they brightened at her touch, responding like eager pets. "I am Selyth'aan, Queen of the Aethyrian Empire, Keeper of the Seventh Protocol, Warden of the Threshold Between. You may address me as Selyth'aan." Behind Cassius, Piper made a sound that was half gasp, half whimper. Rourke had his hand on his rifle but hadn't drawn it yet, which showed admirable restraint. Cassius held up a hand in what he hoped was a calming gesture. "Selyth'aan," he said, testing the name. It felt strange on his tongue, too many syllables in the wrong places. "I'm going to need you to back up a bit. You said 12,000 years ago. Are you telling me you've been asleep for 12,000 years? 11,642 of your solar years," she corrected. "Approximately. The chronometric drift in stasis is difficult to calculate precisely." Cassius did the math, gave up halfway through, and settled for a general sense of existential vertigo. "That's older than recorded human history." "Yes." "That's older than writing." "Yes." "That's older than okay, I'm just going to stop before I have an ontological crisis." He rubbed his face, trying to organize his thoughts into something resembling coherence. "Where are your people, the Aetherians? Is there a fleet coming? An empire we should know about?" Selyth'aan stopped walking. Her hand, still resting on the wall, curled into a fist. When she spoke again, her voice had lost its imperious edge and gained something that might have been grief if grief could be carved from stone. "Gone," she said. "All of them. The cities, the fleets, the colonies. My empire spanned 600 systems. We had technology your species won't develop for another 1,000 years. We had art that could make stars weep and philosophy that could rewrite the laws of physics, and we are gone." She turned to face him, and her silver eyes were wet. "Your people have never heard of us, have they?" "No," Cassius admitted. "I'm sorry." She nodded as if she'd expected this, as if she'd woken up prepared for the worst possible news. "The unraveling was thorough then. It erased us completely." "The what?" Selyth'aan moved to the center of the chamber, where the sarcophagus had been. She raised her hands, and the floor responded, tiles shifting and rising to form a pedestal topped with a smooth black surface. She touched it, and the surface lit up, projecting a three-dimensional star map into the air above them. Thousands of stars hung in holographic space, connected by lines of light that pulsed like arteries. "This was the Aethyrian Empire at its height," she said. 600 systems, 2,000 habitable worlds, a population of 4 trillion souls. She made a gesture and the map changed. Stars began to dim, wink out, vanish. The network of light fractured, broke apart, dissolved into isolated points that flickered and died. This is what the unraveling did to us. Cassius watched the Empire collapse in fast forward, a civilization vanishing from the galaxy like morning frost under sunlight. What is the unraveling? A force, an entity, a concept. We never determined its true nature, only its effects. She manipulated the projection, zooming in on a cluster of stars that were darkening faster than the others. It does not destroy with weapons or plague. It does not conquer or consume. It simply makes you forget. First you forget your history, then your culture, then your language. Then you forget why you built your cities, why you traveled to the stars, why you exist at all. Civilizations collapse into confusion and chaos. Within a generation, there is nothing left but scattered primitives who have no memory of what they once were. That's horrifying, Piper whispered. Yes, Selyth'aan agreed. My people tried to fight it. We built weapons that could unmake reality, ships that could flee to other dimensions, sanctuaries hidden in folded space. Nothing worked. The unraveling found us wherever we went. It was patient, thorough, inevitable. She closed her fist and the projection vanished. So we chose a different path. We chose to wait. Wait for what? Cassius asked, though part of him already knew the answer. For you. She turned to face him fully, and there was something in her expression that made his stomach drop. For a human. For this specific human, though we did not know your name or face. We knew only that someone would come, someone with the right genetic resonance, someone who could wake me from stasis and help me complete the work my people could not finish. Cassius laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of humor. You've got the wrong guy. I'm an excavation engineer. I drill holes in rocks for a living. I'm not a warrior or a scientist or whatever it is you think you need. You are exactly what I need. She approached him, close enough that he could see the faint luminescence beneath her blue skin, the way her long ears twitched slightly when she spoke. Your genetic code carries markers that were placed there 11,000 years ago. Engineered into your ancestors by my people when your species was still learning to farm. Every generation, those markers were passed down, refined, concentrated, waiting for the precise combination that would produce you. That's impossible. And yet you are here, and yet you woke me. And yet you understand words spoken in a language that has been dead since before your civilization learned to write. She reached out and touched his chest, her hand resting over his heart. You were made for this moment, Cassius Vane. Your entire existence, your entire bloodline, was designed to intersect with mine at this precise point in space and time. He wanted to argue, to deny, to insist that she was wrong, that there had been some mistake, that he was just a regular guy who'd gotten unlucky with his work assignment. But looking into those silver eyes, feeling the warmth of her hand through his suit, he couldn't shake the sensation that she was telling the truth. That everything he was, everything he'd ever been, had been leading him here. Okay, he said, his voice steadier than he felt. Let's say I believe you. Let's say I was engineered by your people to wake you up. What happens now? Selyth'aan smiled, and it was not a comforting expression. Now we prepare. The unraveling is coming. It felt my awakening the moment you touched the crystal. It will be here soon, and when it arrives, we will do what my empire could not. She stepped back, her hand falling away. We will fight it, and we will win. Or we will be forgotten like everything else. Outside the chamber, beyond the temple, beyond the dead moon, something vast and formless stirred in the dark between stars, drawn by the quantum signature of an ancient queen's awakening. It had no thoughts, no consciousness, no malice. It simply was, and where it was, memory died. The countdown had begun. 3 days on Erythros 7 had taught Cassius that time moved differently in the temple. Not literally. His chronometer still ticked away seconds with mechanical precision. But psychologically, existentially, in ways that made him question whether the universe outside still operated on the same physical laws. Selyth'aan didn't sleep, or if she did it standing up with her eyes open while communing with the walls. The temple responded to her like a living thing, rooms reconfiguring themselves as she walked through them, passages opening to reveal chambers that definitely hadn't existed 5 minutes ago. Piper had given up trying to map the place after the corridor they'd marked as North 7 looped back on itself in a way that violated 3 dimensions and possibly a 4th. She'd retreated to the shuttle to file reports that Cassius knew were being read by increasingly panicked executives at Helix Dynamics. Rourke remained, silent as ever, but Cassius caught him watching Selyth'aan with the expression of a man trying to decide if he was guarding a prisoner or protecting a valuable asset. Cassius himself had been drafted into what Selyth'aan called attunement training, which mostly involved standing in specific locations, while she made the temple do things to his neural chemistry. It wasn't painful exactly, more like someone was rearranging his brain's filing system without asking permission. "This is deeply uncomfortable," he said, standing in the center of a circular chamber while symbols crawled across the floor beneath his feet. "On a scale of 1 to 10, this is a solid 8 on the feeling like my skull is being remodeled scale. Your species has remarkably low tolerance for cognitive restructuring," Selyth'aan said from somewhere behind him. She was manipulating a control surface that had grown out of the wall like a crystalline tumor, her long fingers dancing across glyphs that shifted under her touch. The Aethirian children underwent this process at age 7. Yeah, well, Aethirian children didn't grow up eating processed food and watching bad television. We're delicate. The symbols pulsed brighter, and Cassius felt something in his mind click into place like a key turning in a lock he hadn't known existed. "What exactly are you doing to me?" "Teaching you to perceive the temple's language. Words alone are insufficient. You must learn to think in the grammar of engineered reality." She made an adjustment, and suddenly Cassius could see the chamber differently, not just with his eyes but with some other sense that had no name. The walls weren't solid. They were crystallized probability, frozen intention, mathematics made manifest. "Can you feel it?" "I can feel something. Mostly I feel like I'm going to throw up, but there's definitely something else happening." "Focus on the sensation. Let it expand." He tried. The new sense unfurled in his mind like a flower blooming in fast forward, and abruptly he understood what he was standing in. The chamber wasn't just a room. It was a mechanism, a tool designed to interface with consciousness itself. The symbols beneath his feet were instructions written in pure concept, bypassing language entirely, and he could read them. Not translate them, not interpret them, read them the way he'd read a stop sign or a grocery list. "Oh," he said. "Oh, that's deeply weird." Selyth'aan stepped into his field of vision, satisfaction evident in her expression. "You learn quickly. Most humans would require weeks to reach this level of integration. Most humans weren't genetically engineered by your people to be compatible with ancient alien architecture." "True." She deactivated the control surface, and it sank back into the wall like water draining through sand. "Come, there is something I need to show you." She led him deeper into the temple, through passages that twisted in directions his newly expanded perception suggested were orthogonal to standard 3-dimensional space. They passed chambers filled with devices whose purposes he could almost grasp, something that bent light into knots, something that sang in frequencies that made his bones itch, something that looked like a frozen explosion held in a web of force. Finally, they reached a room that was empty except for a single pedestal supporting what appeared to be a sphere of liquid starlight. "This is the archive," Selyth'aan said. "The collected knowledge of the Aethyrian Empire, compressed into quantum substrate and suspended in temporal stasis. Everything we knew, everything we were, preserved in a volume smaller than your fist." Cassius approached the sphere cautiously. It cast no light but somehow illuminated the room anyway, a gentle radiance that made the shadows retreat to the corners. Why show me this? Because you need to understand what was lost, what the unraveling took from the galaxy. She reached out and touched the sphere, and it responded, projecting images into the air around them. Cities that floated in the clouds of gas giants, their spires reaching into space. Ships that moved through dimensions like needles through fabric. Gardens where the plants sang in harmony and the soil was woven from captured dreams. Art galleries where the paintings existed in 5 dimensions and the sculptures were made from frozen time. We were not perfect. We had wars, conflicts, failings, but we were magnificent. The images shifted, showing Aethirians going about their lives. Blue-skinned people with long ears, wearing clothes that seemed to flow like water, laughing and arguing and creating and loving. Cassius saw children playing in impossible playgrounds. Scholars debating in amphitheaters carved from crystallized thought, artists painting with light and sound and emotion. He saw Selyth'aan herself, younger somehow despite her timeless features, standing on a balcony overlooking a city that stretched to every horizon, her golden hair moving in a wind that carried the scent of flowers that no longer existed. "You were a queen," he said. "I was many things. Queen was simply the title that survived into stasis." The projection changed again, showing her in different contexts, commanding a fleet, mediating a dispute between rival worlds, dancing at what looked like a wedding, holding a child with hair as golden as her own. I had a consort, Thelian. He was brilliant and insufferable in equal measure. He made me laugh even when I wanted to have him executed for insubordination. What happened to him? The unraveling came to our homeworld while I was preparing the stasis chamber. He bought me time to complete the sequence. I felt him forget me before the chamber sealed. Her voice remained steady, but her hand trembled against the sphere. The last thing he said was my name, and then he said it again, confused as if he'd never heard it before, and then he was gone. Cassius didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. They stood in silence while the archive cycled through images of a civilization that had been erased so thoroughly that even its enemies had forgotten to remember it. Eventually, Selyth'aan withdrew her hand and the projection vanished. "The unraveling does not kill," she said. "It does something worse. It makes you never have existed at all. Every thought anyone ever had about you, every memory, every record, gone, rewritten into blank space." Thelian lived for 300 years, touched millions of lives, shaped the course of empires. And now the universe doesn't even have a hole where he used to be. It simply closed around his absence and moved on. "That's why you need me," Cassius said, understanding clicking into place. "Because I'm human. Because we weren't part of your empire. Because we're outside the unraveling's pattern." Partially. She turned to face him, and there was something in her silver eyes that made his breath catch. "But also because you carry something the unraveling cannot erase, a genetic marker placed by my people before the unraveling knew we existed. You are immune to its primary effect. You will remember. And through you, I can anchor myself to reality in a way I could not do alone. So I'm an anchor. You are a lifeline, a fixed point in a sea of forgetting." She stepped closer, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her blue skin. "When the unraveling comes, it will try to erase me again. It will try to convince the universe that I never woke, never existed, never mattered. Your presence will prevent that. As long as you remember me, I remain real. No pressure then." She almost smiled. "You make jokes when you are frightened. It's a defense mechanism. Helps with the existential terror. My people used poetry for that purpose. Long, complicated verses about the inevitability of entropy and the beauty of futile struggle." That sounds depressing. It was extremely depressing, but it was very well-crafted depression. She reached up and touched his face, her fingers cool against his skin. "You are not what I expected, Cassius Vane." The genetic projection suggested someone more serious. "Yeah, well, 11,000 years is a long time for evolution to throw in some personality quirks." He didn't pull away from her touch, even though every rational part of his mind was screaming that this was a bad idea. What happens if I can't do this, if I'm not enough of an anchor? Then the unraveling erases both of us, and this temple becomes another mystery for future archaeologists to puzzle over, assuming they remember to look for it. She lowered her hand. But I do not believe you will fail. You were made for this, literally and figuratively. And despite your humor and your self-deprecation, I see the strength in you. The same strength that brought you down into a dark hole, on a dead moon, to touch something you didn't understand. That wasn't strength. That was curiosity and poor impulse control. In my experience, those are the same thing. Cassius had been awake for 18 hours straight, and his brain felt like it had been put through a blender set to cosmic revelation. Selyth'aan had spent the last 6 of those hours teaching him what she called resonance perception, which was apparently the Aethirian equivalent of learning to read body language, except instead of bodies, it was the fundamental quantum vibrations of reality itself. He'd thrown up twice, experienced what might have been a minor stroke or might have been enlightenment. The jury was still out, and discovered that if he concentrated hard enough, he could see the edges of things that didn't technically exist yet. I think I need a break, he said, sitting down heavily on the temple floor, which obligingly softened beneath him like it had feelings and wanted to help. My neurons are staging a revolt. Selyth'aan stood nearby, working with a lattice of crystalline nodes that floated in the air, rearranging themselves according to principles that made Cassius's new perceptions ache. Your species requires an inefficient amount of rest. The Aetherians needed only 3 hours of sleep per cycle. The Aetherians also got erased from existence, so maybe the human approach has some merit. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling where bioluminescent patterns pulsed in rhythms he was starting to recognize as something like breathing. Can I ask you something? You may ask, why Earth? Out of all the species you could have tagged for this genetic engineering project, why pick the ones who were just figuring out agriculture? We must have seemed incredibly primitive. She was quiet for a moment, her long fingers pausing in their manipulation of the floating nodes. We chose 23 species across the galaxy. Most were far more advanced than yours. 6 had already developed interstellar travel. 3 had computational technology that rivaled our own. What happened to them? The unraveling consumed them all before the genetic markers could fully propagate. Their advancement made them visible, made them targets. But humanity? She turned to look at him, her silver eyes reflecting the temple's light. Humanity was beneath notice. Too young, too scattered, too chaotic. The unraveling ignored you the same way you might ignore bacteria. And in that dismissal, you survived. So we're successful because we were too insignificant to bother erasing. Essentially, yes. That's simultaneously flattering and deeply insulting. The universe often is. She returned her attention to the nodes, making a final adjustment that caused them to chime softly before dissolving into motes of light. Your people have other advantages. Your short lifespans force rapid generational turnover, which accelerated the marker propagation. Your tendency toward conflict and migration spread the markers across your entire species within a remarkably brief period. And your cognitive architecture, chaotic, contradictory, prone to believing impossible things, makes you naturally resistant to the unraveling's primary methodology, which is it convinces you that things were always different than they were. It edits memory, yes, but more than that, it edits the logical framework that supports memory. It makes the present configuration of reality feel inevitable, erasing the possibility that things could have been otherwise. She walked to where he sat, settling beside him with a grace that suggested sitting on floors was beneath her dignity, but she'd do it anyway. But humans regularly believe things that contradict each other. You hold multiple conflicting truths simultaneously and call it complexity. That cognitive flexibility means the unraveling's edits don't take as cleanly. So our superpower is being inconsistent and irrational. In this specific context, yes. She tilted her head, studying him. You are uncomfortable with the idea that your entire species was manipulated. Wouldn't you be? Finding out that my whole genetic lineage was designed by aliens kind of undermines the whole free will thing. Does it? The markers placed in your ancestors gave you the capacity to wake me, nothing more. Every choice you made that led you to this moon was yours. You could have chosen a different career, a different company, a different mission. You could have landed the shuttle elsewhere. You could have waited for authorization before opening the vault. She smiled slightly. You could have kept your glove on. Cassius thought about that moment, standing in front of the crystal sarcophagus, making the inexplicable decision to remove his glove and touch the surface. Why did I do that? Was it the genetic marker compelling me? No, that was simply you being curious and impulsive, which according to your file are your defining characteristics. You have a file on me. The temple compiled one the moment you entered. Your complete genetic sequence, medical history, psychological profile, purchase records for the past 5 years. You buy an alarming amount of instant noodles. They're convenient. He paused. Wait, the temple can access corporate databases. The temple can access any database. Information wants to be free, and the temple is very persuasive about getting what it wants. She flexed her fingers, and a holographic display materialized in the air between them, showing what looked like his personnel file from Helix Dynamics. You scored poorly on the psychological evaluation for team cohesion. The assessor noted that you prefers working alone and demonstrates concerning levels of independence. That's just code for doesn't blindly follow stupid orders. I know, I read the incident reports. You've been reprimanded 4 times for deviating from approved excavation protocols. 3 of those times, I found something valuable that we would have missed otherwise. And the 4th time. Okay, the 4th time I accidentally collapsed a cavern, but nobody died and we salvaged the mission. She waved away the display, and it dissolved into sparks. My point is that you were not compelled to be here. You were enabled to be here. The genetic marker opened a door. You chose to walk through it. Somewhere far above them in the shuttle, an alarm began to sound. Cassius's communicator chirped, and Piper's voice came through, high and tight with stress. Cassius, we have a problem. A big problem. Like existential threat level problem. He was on his feet instantly, Selyth'aan rising beside him with liquid grace. What's wrong? I'm picking up anomalous readings from the moon's surface. Spatial distortions, chronometric fluctuations, and something else that my scanner literally can't classify because it's reading as conceptually impossible. Also, I can't remember what I had for breakfast. Cassius felt his stomach drop. Can you remember having breakfast? There was a pause. No, actually I can't. I remember waking up and then I remember being in the shuttle running scans, but there's nothing in between. That's not normal, right? That should worry me, but I can't remember why it should worry me. Get to the temple, Cassius said. Now bring work, don't stop for anything. Copy that, Piper out. The comm went silent. Selyth'aan was already moving toward the central chamber, her stride purposeful and urgent. Cassius followed, his newly enhanced perception screaming warnings he didn't fully understand. The temple's bioluminescent veins were pulsing faster now, erratic rhythms that suggested distress or alarm. It's here, Selyth'aan said. Earlier than I anticipated. The Unraveling has found us. How long do we have? Minutes, perhaps less. She reached the central chamber and activated the star map, but instead of showing the galaxy, it displayed Erythros 7 and the surrounding space. A spreading darkness was visible at the edge of the projection, not black but something worse, an absence that made his eyes hurt to look at. It's rewriting local causality. Soon it will reach the temple and then it will try to erase me, erase us, erase the fact that we ever met. The temple can't stop it. The temple can slow it, buy us time. But ultimately, the only defense against forgetting is to be remembered. She turned to him, and for the first time since waking, she looked afraid. When it comes, you must hold on to what you know. Remember my name. Remember that I existed. Remember that we spoke here in this chamber on this day. The unraveling will tell you none of this happened. It will feel true. You must resist. How? By being human. By being irrational and stubborn, and refusing to accept what reality insists is obvious. She gripped his shoulders, her fingers surprisingly strong. I am trusting you with something no Aethirian could do. Can you do this? Cassius looked into her silver eyes and made a decision that was either incredibly brave or phenomenally stupid. Probably both. Yeah, he said, I can do this. The temple shuddered. Reality hiccuped. And Cassius Vane, excavation engineer from Earth, prepared to fight an enemy that existed by not existing, armed with nothing but the questionable superpower of human inconsistency and the memory of a queen who had been dead longer than his species had been civilized. It wasn't much, but it would have to be enough. The unraveling arrived like a migraine made of antimatter, and Cassius's first coherent thought was that he should probably be more concerned about the fact that he couldn't remember why he was standing in an empty chamber on a dead moon. His second thought was that the chamber wasn't empty. There was a woman with blue skin and silver eyes gripping his shoulders like she was drowning, and he was the only solid thing in reach. Your name, she said urgently. Tell me your name. Cassius Vane, he answered automatically, then frowned. Why wouldn't I know my own name? Because the unraveling is here. It's already started erasing context. In 30 seconds, you won't remember how you got here. In 60 seconds, you won't remember that I exist. In 90 seconds, you'll forget there was anything to forget. She shook him slightly. I need you to fight it. I need you to remember. Remember what? The thought surfaced and dissolved before he could grasp it. Something important. Something about this woman whose name was Selyth'aan, he said, forcing the syllables out. They felt right, like a key clicking into a lock. Your name is Selyth'aan. You're a queen. You've been asleep for 11,000 years. Yes, relief flooded her features. Hold on to that, don't let go. The temple shuddered again, and Cassius felt something vast and formless press against his mind like a hand pushing through wet clay. It whispered that he was alone here, had always been alone, that the excavation had been routine and unremarkable. The woman, Selyth'aan, her name is Selyth'aan, was just stress-induced hallucination, a trick of recycled air and isolation. He should leave, file his report, move on to the next dead rock. That's not true, he said aloud, anchoring himself with words. I found you in a crystal coffin. You told me about the Aethyrian Empire. You showed me the archive. You have terrible taste in poetry. She laughed, sharp and surprised. I never told you our poetry was terrible. You described it as well-crafted depression. That's terrible poetry. He focused on her face, memorizing the precise shade of blue in her skin, the way her long ears curved back, the silver of her eyes that reflected light like polished metal. Real. She was real. You had a consort named Thelian. He made you laugh. The unraveling took him. Yes, she whispered. The pressure intensified. Cassius felt his memories flexing, trying to accommodate the new reality being written over them. He'd come to Erythros 7 alone. No, that wasn't right. Piper and Rourke were here. Were they? He tried to picture them and found only fuzzy approximations, like actors playing roles he couldn't quite remember. The shuttle. He needed to get back to the shuttle. Report the empty temple. File the paperwork. Standard procedure. No. He grabbed Selyth'aan's arms, returning her grip. You're real. You're standing here. I can feel you. Keep talking, she urged. Fill the space with words. Give memory something to anchor to. You told me humans were unimpressive, that we just learned agriculture when your people found us. You engineered my bloodline. 23 species, but we're the only ones who survived because we were too primitive to matter. The words came faster, building a framework of fact to resist the erasure. You can make the temple's walls move. You don't sleep. You think instant noodles are alarming. You're several thousand years old, and you're standing in front of me right now telling me not to forget you. The temple's bioluminescent veins flared brilliant white, then guttered like dying stars. Reality stuttered. For a brief, horrible moment, Cassius stood in an empty chamber alone, wondering why he felt like crying. Then Selyth'aan snapped back into existence, solid and present and terrified. "It's getting stronger," she said. "We need to force it into definition, make it real enough to fight." "Hell, the ritual chamber, quickly." She pulled him through passages that kept trying to convince him they didn't exist. Twice he lost track of her entirely, found himself standing confused in darkness before she materialized again, and dragged him forward. They reached a circular room where the floor was carved with interlocking patterns that hurt to look at directly. Selyth'aan positioned him at the center, then took a position opposite him. "When I begin, you'll feel the unraveling trying to enter your mind directly," she said, already activating glyphs that rose from the floor like crystalline teeth. "It will offer you relief from confusion, simplicity, clarity. All you have to do is stop remembering. And if I accept, then we both stop existing, and the universe moves on without us." She met his eyes across the chamber. "I cannot force you to do this. The choice must be yours." Piper's voice crackled over the calm. "Cassius, are you there? I can't remember why I came to the temple. I think I should leave." "Stay where you are," Cassius ordered. "That's not you thinking. That's the unraveling." "The what? I don't. There's no such thing as—" Her voice dissolved into static. Selyth'aan began speaking in her ancient language, words that bypassed translation and hit his mind as pure meaning. The glyphs blazed. The temple responded, pulling power from sources Cassius couldn't identify, channeling it through the ritual circle. And the unraveling came, pushing through the barriers like fog through a screen door, formless and patient and inevitable. It touched his thoughts, and suddenly everything made sense. He wasn't fighting anything. There was nothing to fight, just exhaustion and confusion and the perfectly reasonable desire to stop struggling against a reality that was trying to help him. The woman, if there had ever been a woman, was gone, had never been, had always been a mistake in perception. He could rest now. Let go, forget, accept. Except he remembered her saying that humans believed contradictory things simultaneously, that they were irrational and inconsistent, and that was their strength, that they could look at impossible situations and say, "Yeah, okay, but what if not though?" "What if not though?" Cassius said aloud. The unraveling recoiled just slightly. "Just enough." "Her name is Selyth'aan," he continued, speaking into the formless pressure. "She's real, she existed, she exists now. She had an empire, she had a consort, she had a life. You can't erase that, I won't let you." The pressure increased, crushing, insistent. Reality itself bent around the unraveling certainty. But Cassius had spent 3 days learning to perceive things that shouldn't exist, and he was very, very stubborn. "You know what?" he said conversationally. "This is really annoying. You're annoying. You're like the universe's worst gaslighting ex. Oh, nothing happened, you're just confused, let me help you not remember things. Terrible strategy, 0 stars. Would not recommend." Across the chamber, Selyth'aan's eyes widened in something that might have been hope or might have been disbelief that he was taunting an existential threat. "You want to know what I remember?" Cassius pushed harder, words becoming weapons. "I remember instant noodles. I remember collapsing a cavern on my 4th mission. I remember Piper being nervous and Rourke being silent, and touching a crystal coffin with my bare hand, because I'm an idiot with poor impulse control. I remember a blue-skinned woman who's been asleep longer than my entire civilization. I remember all of it, and I'm not going to stop." The unraveling tried a different approach, offering him a version of events where he discovered valuable artifacts, where Helix would promote him, where he'd be rich and comfortable and free of this impossible burden. All he had to do was accept it, choose the easier path. "Yeah, no," Cassius said. "I choose the harder thing. I choose to remember. I choose her." And something shifted. The unraveling, formless and patient and inevitable, suddenly wasn't. Cassius's stubborn insistence, backed by Selyth'aan's ritual and the temple's power, forced it into definition, made it real, and once it was real, it could be fought. Selyth'aan struck. The temple's energy, channeled through 11,000 years of preparation and the quantum anchor of Cassius's unshakable memory, slammed into the newly defined Unraveling like a hammer into glass. It shattered, fractured, dispersed into fragments that dissipated into the void between stars. The pressure vanished. Cassius collapsed to his knees, gasping. Selyth'aan crossed the chamber and caught him before he hit the floor. "You did it," she said, wonder in her voice. "You actually did it. Did I just defeat an cosmic existential threat by being annoying?" "Essentially, yes." "Awesome. Can we never do that again?" She laughed, and it was the first time he'd heard her laugh without grief underneath it. Agreed. Later, after Piper and Rourke had their memories restored, after Helix Dynamics tried and failed to classify what had happened, after Cassius filed the most incomprehensible mission report in corporate history, he stood with Selyth'aan in the temple's observatory, watching stars wheel overhead. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now we ensure it stays dead, hunt down any fragments, make certain the galaxy remembers what was forgotten." She glanced at him. "I will need a guide, someone who understands this new age. And someone who's genetically engineered to keep you anchored to reality." "That too." Cassius grinned. "Well, I do have vacation time saved up, and Helix is probably going to fire me anyway. Then we have an accord." They stood together in the dark, an ancient queen and a stubborn engineer, while above them the galaxy turned, ignorant of how close it had come to forgetting itself entirely. And in the silence between stars, where the Unraveling had been, there was only absence, the good kind, the kind that proves something was defeated rather than erased. Cassius Vane had touched something he shouldn't have, woken someone impossible, and saved existence through sheer bloody-minded refusal to accept reality's terms. Not bad for an excavation engineer with poor impulse control.